Good morning, everyone. First off, I want to give a big thanks to we had a couple donors come forward and donate a bunch of money, so that's awesome. We've jumped up to the amount that we give to Action Against Hunger by a significant amount in the last few days. So that's awesome work, you guys. Really appreciate it. This update is going to focus solely on the European situation when it comes to natural gas and energy coming out of Russia. It's tied to Ukraine, but there won't be any kind of major Ukrainian update here. It's all going to be focused on Europe. And the reason is as everyone probably has heard, is Russia's gas supplies to Europe via the Nord Stream 1 pipeline will not resume until the quote-unquote collective West lifts sanctions against Moscow over its invasion in Ukraine. Now, Dmitry Peskov, which is Vladimir Putin's spokesman, blamed the European Union, the United Kingdom, and Canada and their sanctions against Russia for Russia's failure to deliver gas through the pipeline, which runs via the Baltic Sea from St. Petersburg. Now, Dmitry Peskov said the problems pumping gas came about because of sanctions Western countries introduced against our country and several companies. Peskov also went on to say there are no other reasons that could have caused this pumping problem. Now, the companies and the countries that assist in manufacturing and maintaining these pipelines and the turbines and pumping systems all have come forward and said that's complete nonsense. There's no maintenance issue here. Russia's just refusing to move the gas. We all know that Russia's a bunch of fucking liars, and that's just par for the course. Now, Gazprom, which is Russia's state-run gas monopoly, said Friday it would halt the gas supplies via Nord Stream 1 because of a technical fault. Yeah, bullshit. The German government and the European Union and the Canadians have all disputed such technical justifications. Now, Russian officials have made it pretty clear in recent weeks that they're trying to grow the energy crisis in Europe to support or to try and cease the European Union support for Ukraine. They even go forward to say, obviously, life is getting worse for people, for businessmen, companies in Europe. Of course, ordinary people in these countries will have more and more questions for their leaders. So they're absolutely weaponizing energy, which is completely nefarious and frankly just an evil practice. But again, par for the course for Russia and their war crimes-driven regime. Now, the news of the extended shutdown came on the same day as the West and the G7 agreed to impose price caps on Russian oil in a bid to limit Moscow's ability to finance the war while keeping a lid on global inflation. Now, this also could mean that countries could block insurance coverage or financing for oil shipments, which means Russia wouldn't be able to get them out to any country, regardless of whether it's a sanctioned country or not, because much of the insurance on these comes from Western nations. Now, other Russian pipelines through Ukraine and Slovakia are still running and bringing reduced amounts of gas despite the fighting, one of which is a Turkish pipeline that goes to Bulgaria. However, other pipelines such as Poland and Belarus have been shut down as well. So you can expect probably full shutdowns on these Turkish pipelines if it's pushing Russian gas, especially if the Russians don't like the way the sanctions are going. So what can Europe do? Well, last year, almost 70% of Europe's supply of liquefied natural gas originated from the U.S., Qatar, or Qatar, depends on who you are. I say Qatar, and Russia during 2021. This was according to the U.S. Energy Information Administration. Now, Russia typically supplies about 40% of Europe's natural gas, mostly by pipeline. 35% of this natural gas went via Nord Stream 1. Deliveries last year were around 155 billion cubic meters. Now, this year, the numbers have shifted significantly. The world's largest liquid natural gas producer and exporter, which is the United States, is now supplying an additional 15 billion cubic meters more on top of what they normally supply. But that only accounts for about 1/10 of what Russia supplied last year. And to my European followers, I know it's got to be really irritating that the U.S. has such a ridiculous abundance of resources and that you guys have to kind of be nice to us backwoods crazies. But you know what? Hey, at least we're not as bad as Russia. Now, in the first half of this year, the U.S. sent the most liquefied natural gas to the European Union and UK ever, and it's provided about 47% of Europe's total LNG imports. Other major suppliers to Europe include Qatar at 15%, and then Russia still supplied 14% this year, and then a mix of African countries at a combined 17%. The The issue with the U.S. trying to replace Russia as the major supplier is transport, and because there's no pipeline that runs from U.S. to Europe, so everything has to go by ship. The U.S. is certainly trying to ramp up transport capability, and in the first 6 months, the U.S. exported about 39 billion cubic meters to Europe, compared to 34 cubic meters for the entire year last year. So 8 North American LNG export terminals are under construction. The goal for America is to increase supplies to Europe by 60% by 2027, which, again, will just continue to make the U.S. filthy ass rich. The nice thing about U.S. exports is Russia wouldn't dare interfere with them. So, however, this doesn't do anything for this coming winter, and there's no single country that can replace Russia as Europe's supplier, whether it's because of production or logistics. Norway, Europe's second biggest gas supplier behind Russia up until recently, regional supplier that is, has been raising production to help the European Union towards its target of ending reliance on Russian oil or Russian fossil fuels by 2027. Now, they just brought online a new pipeline just a bit ago, as well as a pipeline that's supposed to bring another 10 billion cubic meters of gas per year to flow to Poland, is planned on opening in October. Qatar, who sometimes exports more than the U.S. actually, as well as Australia, who can offset prices by filling an Asian supply vacuum created by the U.S. moving supplies to supply Europe, as well as Nigeria, Algeria, and others are trying to ramp up as well. Canada, unfortunately, lacks the export facilities and usually relies on U.S. facilities for shipment, so that's really a no-go for them. But like Australia, it's trying to fill gaps elsewhere as the U.S. pivots to try to supply Europe. U.S. supplies a lot of Asian countries, but Australia and Canada may be able to fill those gaps. Germany is among those who are trying to build liquid natural gas terminals to receive more shipments, and are planning to build 2 in just 2 years, which is astonishing because it took like 15 months to add a second floor to the building I work at. Energy ministers across the European Union have said they want to reduce gas by 15%. If successful, this would mean that the European Union will only need to replace about 140 billion cubic meters. Norway can fulfill 25% of that, the US 10%, and then, as I said, others are trying to ramp up as well. EU storage is currently at 72%, which the goal is 80% by November, which means they're on track. So it's highly unlikely like homes and schools and hospitals will lose heat because the governments are required to impose rationing first on businesses, but it will hurt industry. This winter will be rough when it comes to energy prices, but despite what the Russian propaganda is saying, Europeans won't freeze to death in their homes. However, if this isn't solved in the next year, energy costs will likely cause an increase in Europeans wanting to move their businesses and themselves to the U.S. So what are the alternatives? Well, Germany is restarting coal plants. The Germans also are trying to decide today if they're going to extend the life of 3 nuclear plants. France is reinstating all of its nuclear plants. Most of the uranium from these comes from Kazakhstan, Russia, Nigeria, France, Ukraine, Switzerland. The UK is investing $3.8 billion in next-gen nuclear power, and of course renewables are always in focus, but they're still in their infancy. So what does this do to Russia, though? Well, a Yale University study found that contrary to widespread alarmism over the adverse impacts of the war on the global commodity prices, the commodity prices are going to hurt Russia far more than they are hurting the rest of the world. Russia export revenue is overwhelmingly derived from commodities. Last year, their exports were 40% in energy and commodities. Due to sanctions, it will likely be closer to 60% this year, and it's taking a major hit. Russia is expected to have a 12% GDP reduction this year. For comparison, COVID only reduced the US GDP by 3.5% in 2020. A depression is considered anything above 10%. Now, they're trying to sell to Asia, but China is just buying it at a discount and reselling it to Europe, which is again hurting the Russians. Russian oil is selling nearly $30 a barrel cheaper than the market. Also, Russia is having to flare all of its gas that was dedicated to Nord Stream 1. It's costing Russia $15 million per day. It's also dumping 10,000 tons of CO2 into the atmosphere, which is about the same amount that 400,000 U.S. homes produce in a single day. So Russia has also lost a lot of leverage in its negotiation power. Basically, India and China are saying, take it or leave it, we're paying these prices, and if you don't want it, kick rocks. And Russia's having to take significant discounts. Unfortunately, the broader problem is going to be the impacts to the environment as coal and CO2 generation from flaring continues to be a major problem.